obligations.
I wasn't sure if it's not coming, you pretty much, that's okay. It's all right.
He was up here with the Michael Escort, you know, they got
Stay up on his horse.
big Escort.
Welcome everyone. Normalcy, we'll be passing around a roster so we have a record of your attendance. And certainly I hope that you are pleased with the outcomes of what comes before us today. We will conduct this meeting according to the ethics outlined by us by the North Carolina government, for lack of a better term, which says any member who has a conflict of interest or sees they have a potential conflict of interest come up to notify the board and to be so advised by the board and staff of your action in regards to that. Having said that, we'll go ahead and begin this meeting. Mr. Campbell?
Thank you, Mr. President. The first item, of course, are the minutes. I did want to point out one thing to you, an edit I made to the minutes yesterday afternoon, something if you will notice on the October 2016 minutes, if you scroll down to page 4 of that under the financial report, recall that we had you specifically approve an increase in the designated litigation reserve from $200,000 to $500,000. And my fault, I forgot to get that early as a separate thing. I added that, but that's the only difference from the minutes that you guys had seen. So it's your pleasure whether you want to do both sets of minutes or take them individually.
Based on the edit, unless there is any board member who has a desire to do them separately, I'll call for a motion that we approve those two sets of minutes, the regular board meeting and the October 24th conference call at this time.
I'll make that motion there.
Deal. All the motions say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, the minutes are adopted. And I think you have an introduction there.
I do. I actually have two introductions. But the first was Lisa Parker Hawkins. Come on up, Lisa. Okay, you got to sit on the hot seat at least once here. Okay. But I think most of you have met Lisa, who has come aboard and works up at the front and is our air traffic controller and general bulwark against hostile forces up there at front. But Lisa has, as you all know, retired with her family, and we are delighted to have Lisa. And I wanted to make Lisa was recognized on the record for a new receptionist, and we love her already. So. Lisa, anything you want to say? You got to give a speech. I didn't tell you about that part of it.
I'm just glad to be a part of the team. It's been very welcoming here, and I'm just happy.
Lisa, there's a little problem. Then we allocated 30 minutes for your acceptance.
Let the filibuster begin.
But we do welcome you to the board and to the family, I believe, and hope that it's very rewarding for you, certainly. Mm-hmm. And you're the one that when I called and asked to speak to Jay, you said, I hadn't seen him in 3 or 4 days. Are you the one?
Exactly right.
Okay. Right.
She has strict instructions. Nobody gets through to me.
Hey, look at it this way. It probably won't get any worse than it has been today.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
She has been fantastic. And I also want to introduce Kim Sims. Come on up, Kim. So Kim is our new investigator. As you all know, that one of our investigators left and moved out to Oklahoma from north. So Kim is working as in the northeast district of the state. So this covers a lot of your territory out there, Gene. But Kim, would you like to introduce yourself and give the bullet here?
I was also unaware that I was going to be able to sit up here with you guys, but I am
you can blame Crystal for that.
I'm very glad to be able to meet you. I've only met a couple of you, so I was really excited to be able to come this morning and at least be able to put names with faces. I'm very excited for this opportunity. I actually was in law enforcement prior to this, so it's a little bit of a change, but it's nice that I still get to kind of do the investigation side of it. But I'm super excited, and everybody's been very welcoming.
And you are quite welcome, and we'll give. I guess we can be easier on her, I assume, but we hope that we don't do anything to make you go to Oklahoma.
No,
That was out of it. That had nothing to do with any of
Oh.
us. That had nothing to do. Melinda, that was a personal and a family thing.
Oh, okay, so really, it wasn't just to get that far away from you and Clinton, is that right?
One could hardly fault anybody whose instincts were to do that, but I don't think that was the cause this time, so.
We hope that you flourish in your new job, and we give you the resources you need to do your job properly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, board members, and thank you, Lisa and Kim, for being on the spot on this. And Crystal, you were introduced in Hayes last time, so we won't put you back up for that. Related to, just FYI, I think related to Crystal Smith, who, she's in the small conference room. So if you do have any need that you need to break, I don't think there's anything that will require a closed session today, but if there's anything you need to break out for, just use my office on that, and we'll continue to shuffle the office around. Next item on the agenda, Mr. President, as you know, every year we have to set our upcoming meeting and pre-hearing conference schedule, and there are various places over in Raleigh we have to report those things to, and so we have before you a proposed schedule running from June of 2017, running through to 2018. The only alteration from the normal third Monday and third Tuesday is in July of 2017, as you all graciously agreed to back that up a week so I can go carve stupid little animals out of wood with the Boy Scouts for 2 weeks and at the National Jamboree this summer. And so that's the only change. A lot of times, as you know, we have to move our May meetings, but in May of 2000, to accommodate the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy annual meeting, we don't need to do that in May of 2018. The timing of that works out okay. So that is the schedule. Like I say, just the one deviation from the normal third Tuesday. Keith, you'll see, you're appearing on the PHC rotation. You'll come in there in September of next year, so we'll get you ready for that, no problem. But there it is.
Do we need to officially approve that schedule?
We need an official approval of that, and then we can report it. And as you all know, and Keith, so you know as well, it's not uncommon that folks have to switch out on a pre-hearing conference day. So if you see a day that you've been assigned and it doesn't work out, the board members are just terrific about swapping in and out, and we can do that as we need to.
Consider a motion to adopt this schedule.
So moved.
Motion second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. That's been adopted.
Next item on the agenda, Mr. President, and this is looking for guidance from you guys to staff. As you all know, at the September board meeting, we discussed, or at the September retreat, we discussed the possibility of moving the elections to coincide with the renewal period. And Clint and I have completed an analysis of that. I provided you with a memo about that. The short version, at least as short as I ever am on this, is you certainly do have the authority to change the election period. And we believe that if you wanted to move, we would require rule changes, and they included in this memo is an appendix with the rules changes that would be required. Well, there are two decision points, really. One is, do you want to go forward with a proposed rule amendments that would change the election to coincide with the renewal period? And second, what adjustment would you want to make that happen? And there are two options on the table. The move is really easy because we have elections a year in advance. To adjust the election to the renewal period, you could go either of two ways. You could adjust them such that the apprenticeship period, for lack of a better word, would be relatively short. In other words, you would have, in a year in which there were board member vacancies or elections for coming up in May 1st of whatever year, you could back up and run the board elections from November of the year before to March 1st of the year of, right? So that would be the renewal period immediately preceding the new term. The upshot of that would be, we don't have any problem fitting that in. What it would mean, though, is that we would no longer, if we made that adjustment, there would be a very short time period between the conclusion of the election and a newly elected board member taking their seat. So one of the things you guys are going to have to think about is, well, what is the value? Is there a sufficient value to having that long lead-in period? And there's no right or wrong answer to that. It's a sort of a policy preference. The other alternative, if you wanted to go with this, would be to back elections up so that if you had, say, May of 2020, I think are the next vacancies or open seats. You could back up almost a year and a half, and you would have your election from November of the year and a half prior to the vacancy through March. You would preserve a lengthy apprenticeship period. The thing to think about with that is you're now having a 4-month election period instead of a 1-month election period, potentially 14 or 15. So it's just sort of a question is whether you think people would be deterred from running for the board, or is that too long a lead-in time? I don't have a strong feeling about that one way or the other. But that's sort of, those are the two decision points. Do you want to consider this, move forward with a possible adjustment? And if we move forward, what would that adjustment be? And it's perfectly easy to write the rule either way, as you would want to do it. And we don't have to have a decision today. We got plenty of time to think about this. But so that's what the memo talks about. And again, there are a couple of appendices to that memo. One shows what we've already described, which is the declining participation in elections after they sort of peaked out 5 years ago, and then a separate appendix that would show what we believe are the changes that would need to be made to the existing rules to accommodate that. So there's where we are, and I'm happy to answer questions or.
I think the most pressing thing to talk about among the board members would be, how long do you think that initiation, for lack of a better word, period? Right. Andy would be a good one to give input. He's recently, and Keith might also have some input on that, and welcome that input, or any other input at this time.
I think mine's a little difficult because I was well acclimated to the board before I got elected. I came up to a lot of board meetings, and so I might be a little bit unique compared to some people that may get elected to the board. So my involvement at the school, I don't know that I'm a fair person to really give you an opinion on that, because certainly people get elected to the board that have had minimal exposure to the board. So, Keith, do you have any thoughts on that as a?
You're sort of in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I'd be curious as to what you think.
I think, the experience, the time is good because, I think the first time I met with you guys, it was like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much information, but now, I'm becoming more comfortable with, how the processes go and everything. So I think the longer one, probably would be, the most beneficial for somebody who's a novice. But if the board did choose a shorter one, I don't think that it would be an issue. I think it's not anything that you can't learn. It's just you might learn it quicker.
Right, and I would say whichever y'all wanted to choose. Again, I've got no preference either way.
Well, possibly if we chose the shorter term, we could actually adopt a little more structured acclimation process.
I was going
Which
to
might be-
absolutely say that my commitment.
That just scares me to death, but anyway.
Well, but my commitment, I know, and fair enough, but my commitment would certainly be, if the preference would be the short, and what the shorter period has going for it is, you guys already know, it's a long commitment. You're committing to 5 years to being on the board, then it's a year lead in, and now we'd be backing that up about another 4 months. Maybe it would affect people, or maybe it wouldn't, I don't know, we can't test that. But to your point, Gene, that's exactly right. Certainly from a staff perspective, what we would commit to is that we would, if it was a shorter period, we would take what we did for Keith and probably turn that into more like a 2-day kind of thing and bring somebody in and give them the bolus dose of this and move through. And we would have to be more programmatic about new board members sitting on PHCs. We can do it. It's really just a policy.
To me, that makes the most sense. And I just think that, first of all, I believe if you care enough about the board to run for office, you might spend a little bit of time yourself preparing, just to learning it before you run, that type thing. And it would tie right into the thing we started the year before last, where we started having those regional meetings. If you're interested in running for the board, let's talk about it.
And
So
my sense, and Keith and Andy and others can speak to this as the recipient, my sense that that has been well received. And that folks, when they run for the board, do feel like and some folks come in and they hear that and they think, God, that's not at all what I thought it was, and I'm not gonna do it, but the staff will make it work, whatever your pleasure is on that. It's really just up to y'all.
It's a little scary to me to make it any longer. I just think it's untenable to some extent.
I lean slightly in that direction, but again, we'll do whatever is
Well,
best for
members-
y'all.
Y'all decide on that today, or think about it a little bit. We have time for sure.
My concern with it is, so the candidate would go from November 1 till March the 1st without really knowing what the result's gonna be.
Correct. It'd be a long election period.
That's a negative. I don't think a shorter internship's a problem, personally. So the election would end March 31st?
No. We would run exactly coterminous with the renewal period. So it would open on November 1st, and then the renewal period closes on March 1st.
March 1st.
Yeah.
So, and then they'd start serving May the 1st?
Yep. And if we had to have a runoff, we'd have to bake that in, but the rule amendments we got in front of you sort of, the only thing with the compressed schedule that could become a challenge, I don't think is anything internally. The issue would be getting the SEIs over to the Ethics Commission and the boards, but honestly, and Gene, you know this probably better than anybody else, the truth of the matter is with the SEIs, and I always get you guys to get them in early for the new, but they still sit on them until the last minute, so we could get them. Bill, to your point about a long election period, one of the things that we did talk about is whether you set it up so that the election period runs for some shorter time within the renewal, but we can't figure out a way, and y'all may have thoughts on this, we can't figure out a way to do that we think there are two challenges with that. One would be if we did some shorter period within renewal, we would have to reprogram the renewal system in the middle of renewal. And I think Debbie would probably have me taken out back and put down if I suggested something like that. And then the other thing we'd be concerned about is even if we could do it from a programming standpoint, folks would be confused if we say elections are during renewal and then somebody, as a lot of somebodies do, waits till the last minute to renew and then they say, well, I couldn't vote. That was our concern. But to your point, it is a long election period. And they're good and bad. Good and bad. Yes, sure.
People get tired
You
of
had enough time, didn't you, Stan?
emails.
Yeah, I did.
Again, it's whatever your pleasure is. If you want to think about it, this is not a rush item. If you want us to go ahead and go forward, we can, if the choice was, yeah, let's go forward and go with the shorter lead-in period of time, there's one minor adjustment we'd need to make to the draft amendments, and we could go ahead and go forward, or totally up to y'all, as it always is.
And since this is gonna take a rule change, we're gonna have to propose it, there'll be notice
Yeah.
of comment.
Some-
Start the ball rolling, and then you can have months to think about it.
I think that we probably need to go ahead and make a decision today just to go ahead and get the process going. Just an unofficial poll, longer or shorter? Shorter or longer? I'll make it easy for you.
I really don't care, but,
It's a no.
shorter would be.
He's
all right.
always a no, so it's nothing unusual, right? Right, Joey? Longer or shorter?
Shorter would be my choice.
Ms. Day?
I don't really have an opinion either way.
And
I would go with the short version.
Joey, do you have a thought on that versus, you're looking back on it?
I know the year that the print was very helpful, but if you do a pragmatic window where you are spending time with or finding the board member to the new electee to kind of shadow those 2 or 3 months.
Which is pretty much what we do with the public members now.
Right.
It's
So I think that would be fine.
We can elect a president, he takes over in 3 months, so there you go.
That's right. I don't think we can accomplish a transition here.
Well, I'm feeling to move to the shorter. Do you need official action on that?
Yeah, what I would ask for is to have a motion to go forward with publishing for notice and comment,
Publish for notice.
change amendments to the rules that would reflect the shorter lead-in period. And
Have a motion, Dr. Bowman? Have a second?
Second.
Stan Haywood?
And those are basically all in this appendix D, except that there's one that's an either or depending on what you chose. So we'll go with these as adjusted with your selection.
Let's vote on it then. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Ayes have it. So we'll go to shorter term, and I would like for you to take 2 minutes possibly to give the people in attendance a little background on why we're doing this.
sure, and if anybody wanted to read this lengthy memo that I wrote, you're more than, if you have no social life or trouble sleeping, you're welcome to do it. But so the issue is with board elections, I think probably a lot of you know that are here, we are the only state in the United States that still does direct election of pharmacist members of the Board of Pharmacy. Every other board in the country appoints, although the specific mechanisms for appointment vary. In 2000, Kristen could tell me now, I forget, I think it was in 2009, we went to an electronic voting system. Voter participation in board elections has never been very good. And one of the identified concerns when we did paper elections, we'd send paper ballots, they mostly went to places where people work. There was, a month where they sat around, they got lost. And so we went to an electronic voting system in 2009. And for 3 years, we saw a fairly steady increase in the number of pharmacists who were voting. And we sort of topped out, we did top out in 2011 with about 3,300 pharmacists that voted, which sounds like a lot of people, but as a percentage of pharmacists who were eligible to vote, that was, I think at that time, something like 27% of eligible pharmacists. Since then, that trend has reversed, and during the last election, it was the lowest voter turnout by pharmacists in terms of raw numbers since 1987, and as a percentage of eligible pharmacists was probably the lowest percentage in the board's history, based on assuming that there were a lot more pharmacists in 1987 than there are now, which I think is a safe assumption. So one of the discussions we've been having was, well, is this a barrier issue? And one of the things that we knew is when during the renewal period, we put a specific request or a specific tickler in the renewal that said, are you signed up to use the CSRS? That folks realized during renewal, hey, actually I haven't done that, and they go on and do it. So our hope is that by keying the election period to the renewal period, as folks renew, there'll be a window that comes up and says there's a board election. Have you voted, or would you like to vote? And people won't be required to vote to renew. That raises all sorts of other issues we want to get into, but would have the ability to immediately click on that and go through and vote. And the whole idea is to increase the number of pharmacists who participate in the election. So I don't know. We'll see whether it does that or not, but that's what's driving this. There's not some sort of, results dissatisfaction. It's just more trying to make sure that pharmacists who wish to exercise their ability to vote in board elections, that we make it as easy as possible to do that.
And certainly to have a participatory process where the pharmacists elect their members is kind of unique in the United States. And we wouldn't want to put ourselves in a situation where the powers be said, well, your people don't vote anyway, we just need to start appointing your members. I think that's the bottom line, right?
That is certainly a motivating factor in this, is to try to preserve that ability.
Thank you.
You're welcome, and
Look forward to-
thank you to the board members. You guys provided very thoughtful input on this when we were at the retreat, and it made mine and Clint's job much easier as we were doing that. So.
Jay, I would just encourage you and board staff, and we're a long way from the next election, but when you're putting that out there, however you set it up on the website, make sure you describe to people what they're doing and the fact that we do vote in North Carolina. I think one of the issues that I found is that there's a lot of pharmacists in North Carolina, surprisingly, that don't even realize that they can vote for the Board of Pharmacy.
That, and it still surprises me that a lot of pharmacists, I'll talk to, and I'll say, well, why didn't you vote? And they said, well, my district wasn't
Right.
up. And
Exactly.
I know that, but everybody,
There's a lot of misinformation. We have people that reciprocate in, we have people that just have never gotten involved, and so over a period of time, they just forget that that's something we do in North Carolina.
I think that's a good suggestion, Andy, and what we'll do is, of course, we have the standard posting and we have a rulemaking process, but I'd be
Right.
happy to draft sort of an introductory
Yeah.
that's more than just the formal legal thing that says, this is why we're doing this. And,
Yep.
yeah, I will do that. Thanks for the suggestion on that. Next item, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
As you all know, at the October meeting, we talked at your direction, asked me to draft a potential amendment to the licensing examination rules that would cap the number of testing attempts for the NAPLEX and MPJE at 5. And as we discussed at length, that would be a cap that would coincide with NAVP's determination as test developer and administrator that a 5 attempt limit is needed to ensure test security and integrity. So you have behind there a proposed amendment, and there's more underlining and strike through on that. So if it's okay, Mr. President, just let me go through a little bit, because there's a little more that's going on in this proposed amendment than just the 5 cap limit, and explain what some of those things are. One of the things
Hey,
that.
before you start,
Yeah.
could I give a little background, because we've done a little work on that, and I've done a little work on that on my own.
Yep.
I had the opportunity last weekend to meet with Dean Lewin at UNC School of Pharmacy and talk to him about passing rates on the NAPLEX. And it's interesting that there has been a marked decrease in people passing the first time, in some schools worse than others. We talked about that in length. And we also talked about how many applications per seat in pharmacy schools are now coming in, and I think Andy can probably tell us it's certainly different than it was 3 or 4 years ago. Now, Dean Lewin tells me, and he's a very good friend, that he feels like that at UNC they continue to have as strong applicants as anywhere. But anyway, we had that conversation about it, and I began to talk to him about, well, whose responsibility should this be if you have 12% of your graduates who failed to pass a minimum competency exam the first time they take it. And we had a long talk about that. I want to talk to you about that some also. But then I had the opportunity to go to Chicago last week. President Juan appointed me to a task force where we were looking at trying to grow the international body of people coming to join NBP, to make it like a more international group, that type thing. While I was there, I talked to Carmen Catazon, who's the executive director in ABP, and we talked about the very same thing. And my specific question to him was, Carmen, number one, has there been, or do you believe there is some problem with people who have unlimited access to taking the test, if it will compromise the test? He said, yes, it will, and it has been done. And they have a serious concern about that. So I just followed up on that, had the opportunity. And then we got talking about the NAPLEX, and the NAPLEX was changed last year. I think it went to 225 questions now. It's still a minimum competency examination. There's no plan. Dean Lewin told me he thought they were going to change again next year. There's no plans for it to be changed, just for the record. And but he gave me some information I thought was very, very important. He said, you know, Gene, if someone takes the NAPLEX and does not pass it on the 3rd time, there's less than a 1% chance they'll ever pass it. And they have the data to support that, which I thought was very interesting. And I talked to him about, well, NABP's role. He says, well, you know, we have to be careful about that, because we can't be but so progressive about trying to help people pass the NAPLEX, because it kind of compromises us. So it goes back to the schools of pharmacy again to try to identify students who, you know, don't take tests well, or just some kind of problem coming up. And I'm going to get back with Dean Lewin again and talk to him about that to see if there's something that schools can do. But because I had a real concern about the 5 limit. You know, I felt like that students who go to school, get a PharmD degree, doctor of pharmacy degree, have made a substantial investment, hopefully in time, or certainly in money, and then to be, never ever take the board again is kind of a concern, and there might be an opportunity for them to come and petition and get one, but it'll be difficult, I think. So I came away from the meeting feeling much better about our position, supporting their position, because, and I really came back with a real sincere interest in trying to figure out how we can keep that third person who doesn't pass that board, how we can empower them to figure out what's going on here. Not the board, and hopefully get back to the pharmacy schools, that type thing. But it was an interesting trip last week to Chicago. My plane was landing at O'Hare. I left kind of early Tuesday morning. And you know, when you're flying and you can see out the window and your wheels are almost getting ready to touch down, all of a sudden the pilot took back off again. Kind of interesting because it was a pretty rapid ascent. And he came on the intercom a little bit later and said, well, folks, we got a little too close to the plane in front of us, and they had to abort the landing. That's my first for me, and I've been flown it quite a few times. And this is just for comic relief, I guess, maybe anything. But anyway, we got into the meeting, and I walked right into the meeting from the airport, you know, pretty good timing. We've been in the meeting about 2 hours talking about the international scene, that type thing, and the alarm started going off in the building. And they said something about, go to the nearest stairway exit immediately. And so that was kind of interesting morning for me. But anyway, I made it back home and everything was good. And we saw the SWAT teams come up and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, but I do feel better about the board moving ahead with supporting the NABP thing about the 5 attempts based on the information I got. But I came away also really wanting to do something about those students who are at risk, and I'm going to be talking to people like you and other people like that to see if we can't, not from the Board of Pharmacy, but from professional pharmacy and the pharmacy schools, say, hey, what's going on here? Because some of them rates have gone from like 98% to 87%. And I talked to, of course, there's people there from all over the United States, and I talked to quite a few of those, and most of them have seen their rates drop markedly also.
And I do want, and talking about this too, I want to make sure that we say on the record something that we did discuss before, that none of these changes get in the way of someone with a legitimate diagnosed health issue or learning disability issue from getting reasonable accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act to take the test. And so I know we all know that, but I want to be sure it's said on the record that nothing about the proposal here affects that at all. Folks are certainly entitled to reasonable accommodations and do seek those. And we'll continue to respond to those requests. And
So as a board, we will have the, we could possibly overturn that based on information that's brought to us.
well,
But and I understand, and maybe I shouldn't have said that, but it's got to be said.
But what I would say, the proposal is to be a 5 limit.
Yeah.
And, but I think, but to your point, Gene, there is, I think one thing this does, that a limit does provoke people more to do is not wait around until they have failed the exam 3-4 times before they start trying to figure out what's going on.
That's another bit of information I gleaned was in talking to Carmen. They had at least 4 Roke High pharmacy students who took the board this past time who failed the board. And he also sees, and I'm sure it's totally okay for me to pass the information along, those students who get out of school and they say, well, I'm just going to take some time to be myself and that type of thing and live a little life and then come back and take the board, they're a lot less likely to pass the board. It's also interesting, he told me that their data shows that students who are involved in a pharmacy-related work, or whatever you call that type thing, the more you're involved, the more likely you are to pass the board, that type thing.
Yep.
But as I said, I came back feeling much better about this, and you knew I wasn't happy about it, but, so I wanted to make
That's
sure.
why we go out and get information.
That's exactly right, and
Let me, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me say one thing, just lest there be any confusion. There would not be, under this rule, any leeway to let people have a 6th attempt because there's no provision for waiving the rules for a particular person. So the help would be on the front end on getting the pass before that 5th attempt.
Well, I personally don't have any problem with saying, no, you've had your opportunities. We're talking minimal competency. Yesterday in pre-hearings, it was obvious to me that minimal competency had come into play in a couple of areas. And I think we're doing a great disservice to the public health and to the profession to talk about 6 and 7 and 8 and all those kind of things. It does compromise the exam, but it also compromises the profession. And so I have no problem with saying, matter of fact, if NABP had said 3 times, I would have supported that. I don't have any problem with that, because it is a profession that protects the life of the public health. And if we don't have some kind of borderline, bottom line, the public health is the one that's going to be impacted, and so I have no problem with it. I've felt good about it all the time, Jimmy. So that's just my say-so.
My only comments would be going back to what Gene said, and I think it's important to say it from a standpoint of we are a board of pharmacy, and we need to know what's going on in the profession. We know this, but just to articulate it in front of the group, we do have a national basically default in pharmacists pursuing pharmacy school. Less and less students are applying to pharmacy school. Our applicant pool at Campbell this fall, we're already seeing numbers that are even lower than last year, and last year was really a slow time for us. Every school is experiencing this. Arguably, there are too many pharmacy schools in the country, which opens up a whole bag of worms if we start talking about that issue. And basically, ACPE's position is that if you meet the criteria, if you go through the process of becoming accredited, you will be accredited. There is no stopping someone from opening up a pharmacy school. So as you have a smaller applicant pool and more schools, the number of students that are available to you gets thinner and thinner. And it opens up the door for, do you reduce your class size? Do you keep running the same number of kids you've been running for years? If you continue to run at that same budget number, the same number of kids every year or students, you could open up the door for students to get in that maybe would not have gotten in the past. Now, interestingly enough, as you said, Gene, and we've seen the same thing at Campbell, it's not the kids at the bottom of the class generally that are failing the exam. It's a mix of kids. And so it's Roe-Chi kids just as much as it is a kid that maybe barely squeaked through the program. And so these are all things that we need to keep our eye on, I think, and I think we need to be very well aware of, because our profession is changing. And these things do wax and wane, and it could go the other direction. But right now, for whatever reason, among young people, they are pursuing other health professions besides pharmacy. And I think we could have a long discussion about that would go down a number of different avenues. But it's important for us to be aware of what's going on.
And is there any thought on why sometimes the bottom applicant kids are performing better on the exam than the Roe-Chi kids?
I don't know that anybody's really ever articulated the opposite direction of how would this person in the lower tier of the class pass the exam, but yet this person didn't. And I don't know if it goes to preparation. I know that, you have many students that have the ability to make good grades, but they don't really pull it all together. Some students are able to pull all the information together as a whole, maybe better than some students. So, they get the big picture. Could be test-taking ability. I know that the NAPLEX itself is changing. We're getting to that point now where we're going to see questions where it's which of the following below are correct. Check all that are correct. So you're looking at 5 answers, and instead of it being 1, it might be 3 of them, it might be 4 of them, it might be 2 of them. We don't teach that way in pharmacy school, and so we're having to modify how we teach and test so that students are prepared for that as well. But that's a completely different way of testing. And so there's a lot of things that they're going to be changing for us as a profession from an academic perspective. So,
If I could, I would like to walk through, there are a couple of things in this proposed amendment that I want to be sure I point out specifically.
Yeah, I just want to get a little more background.
This is helpful to me.
Thank you.
Going through. Looking at the proposed amendment specifically, point out a couple things. One of the things you'll see in paragraph A would be the formal elimination of the practical exam. As you all know, we have not given a practical exam in now 10 years now. And we did that under Rule 2510 amendment. Since we're already going to be amending or proposing to amend this rule, Clint, I think it makes sense to go ahead and just get rid of the practical exam piece in there altogether. Paragraph B, I think paragraph B, which we proposed to eliminate altogether, was in there because it tied into when the board gave its own practical exam. So there were some things about legibility and other things. None of that applies to the NAPLEX or the MPJs. We proposed getting rid of this. Paragraph, what would now be paragraphs B and C. Clint and I went back and forth a couple of times on this because, quite honestly, we scratched our head for a long time trying to figure out exactly what that old paragraph meant. we think we figured it out, and we've broken it into 2 paragraphs. Let me tell you what we think this does, and then tell us if we're wrong about that. New paragraph B would just be very clear that a scaled score of 75 or greater is required to pass each examination. That's always been the standard. That's always been the passing standard.
Is that defined by the NABP?
Yeah, they set the scale. It's always 75.
Shouldn't we reference that in case they change it or not?
Boy, that's a good question, Gene. It's always been a scaled score of 75. I don't know, Clint. We could just. I feel like we need to say something, but maybe your idea might be to say a scale score of 75 or such passing score as established by NABP. Do you think? What do you think, Clint?
I mean, yeah, it's a good question, because what if they turn around in a couple of years and say,
A
well, we're
70 is a pass.
a
or
70,
80
yeah,
is a pass.
yeah. Yeah.
We could just change it to the candidate must pass each examination as defined by the testing organization.
I think it keeps us from having to go back and redefine
That's
it.
true. That's a good point.
What's the likelihood it'll change?
I don't think it's great, but, I mean, to Gene's point, if it does, it's better than having to walk back through another amendment. With your indulgence, we would, Clint and I can, I tell you what, if we want to go forward with this, how about my proposal would be, if at the end you vote to go forward with it, we'll make a draft change and then send it back out by email just for you to take a look at and see if it accurately reflects what you've asked us to do. Then new paragraph C, so I think we unwound this thing to say that I think what the board has always had is you get a situation where somebody passes one of the exams, but then they go a long period of time without passing the other. And as we sort of unpeeled that rule, it appears that what the board has always says is basically you got a 2-year window to pass both exams, right? Or you have to start all over. So think about it. The example would be somebody passes the MPJE right after graduation, and it takes them 3 years to pass the NAPLEX. The old rule would say, we get to keep your NAPLEX now, but you got to pass the MPJE again. The board has always had a policy that the passing of both exams needs to occur within a relatively discrete window of time, which makes sense in that if you want both tests to be current tests of minimum competency, then they need to be passed within a relatively close period of time. So what is in here is paragraph C, we don't think is a substantive change from what the rule already was, but it took us a while to sort of unpack that. And I put it out, again, I don't think this is a change, but I wanted to point it out to you guys in case you had any questions or concerns about that. Or take the converse, somebody passes NAPLEX, and then they don't pass MPJE until 3 years later. Well, then they pass MPJE, they'd have to pass NAPLEX. Now, they would still get their 5 attempts on NAPLEX if they'd already passed it one time. They wouldn't have burned those up, but.
I'm pretty confident that's what the rule used to say, but now it says it a little more clearly.
We were pretty sure that the rule as written, that the Rules Review Commission was going to look at it and say, this does not appear to be written in English, and we're not going to have much of a defense to that. Again, we don't think it's a substantive change, so we can leave it if y'all are comfortable with that. And then paragraph D, again, just has the 5 attempt limit. So what would be on the table then, what I'm hearing, perhaps, is authorize staff to go forward with publishing a proposed amendment, but to make a change to what is now paragraph would be amended paragraph B to reflect Gene's suggestion, and then circulating that back to you guys to take a look at before we actually publish.
Motion? We need a motion.
I want to ask another, I just need a little clarification on C. So what you're saying then is if I graduate pharmacy school and take the MPJE and pass it,
Right.
but for some reason,
You go 3 years.
no, you said 2 years,
Well, more than 2 years. I was using an example of 3 years. If you go more than 2 years.
2 calendar year periods starting from the date of the first passing store,
Correct.
I would have to take the NAPLEX and then go back and take the MPJE again,
Yep.
and that would be my second time taking it.
Correct. I think what the rule is designed is to prevent a stale, for lack of a better word, a stale testing result from licensure. That's a policy decision for you guys. But that's what the rule did say before,
It did say the same thing, because I feel like if I passed the MPJE, I passed it.
for all time.
I did it I've already done it one time, exactly right,
That's the policy
back to
decision.
1975.
That's- There were many fewer laws back then.
How often does,
That's when we tested the Code of Hammurabi back then.
Have a clean border and post.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Kara.
how often does the MPJ change?
Well, the MPJE changes every year. Every year the question pool is updated. It doesn't change structurally every year. As you know, it did just change structurally over the past year, but that's a far more uncommon thing. But it does change every year because the law changes every year, so we have to go in and update it. And so I think that's what was driving the rule, is that if you linger this, and now look, how many times has this ever been an issue? I couldn't tell you. I don't even know how to go back and be able to figure that out from the data. My suspicion is it's rarely an issue, and to the extent it's an issue, it's going to be with the same ones that are struggling to pass NAPLEX within 5 years. And I think that ties into the previous discussion you had. If somebody really struggles and it takes them 3 or 4 years, but they do it, are you comfortable that an NAPLEX, for example, an MPJE result that they got 4 years ago, are you comfortable that that's still a sufficient indicator of minimum competency? And that's the policy decision for you guys on that.
If nobody has complained to you, that's a pretty good indication that nobody's had a problem.
Yes, I
Because
know.
they surely would have complained.
Yes, and no, you got that right. So I don't, this, I think, clarifies the language, but doesn't change the substance. And like I say, I'm not, in 11 years, nobody's ever complained to me about this. So, it doesn't mean that we got it up for amendment. This is the time. If you want to make a change, now is the time.
How many attempts do you get for the bar exam?
Varies by, just like with the NAPLEX and the MPJ, it varies greatly by state. I can't remember what the limit is in North Carolina. I passed it, thank God, so I didn't have trouble myself.
How about for physicians or dentists?
There is a limit, the medical board has a limit. It's less than 5, but I can't remember what it is.
Personally, I think 5 is gracious plenty. And,
There are some states you can take the bar as many times as you're willing to fork over the money and go subject yourself to it. But that's true for the NAPLEX in some states now too.
and there are some states that have less than 5, according to your survey.
Yes, that's correct. There are some states that have a 3-test limit for NAPLEX currently.
So where are we on that?
So is if you're, unless there's a desire to change the 2-year sort of framing on getting both scores, then I think where we are is that if it's the board's pleasure, the motion would be to publish proposed amendments for notice and comment. But before that happens, Clint and I would redraft paragraph B on the passing score to reflect your suggestion that we peg that to whatever the testing body sets.
The new B would say something to the effect of a passing test score shall be that which is established by the testing organization, except I might phrase it better than that.
Right, and then we would circulate that back to you all to get feedback that does accurately reflect your instructions on that, and if the answer to that is yes, then we publish it.
based on how encompassing this rule is going forward, I would certainly like to give Keith the opportunity, if he has any questions or comments about it. I also would like to refer back to Mr. McLaughlin if he wanted to add anything or take away anything. We probably won't listen to it, but you're welcome to say it anyway. And any of you students,
I'll listen to you, Judge.
any of you students out there who have a comment, I welcome that at this time. If I don't see any, we'll move ahead.
Thanks, students, for thinking, I hope I don't take 5 attempts.
I think 5 is generous. I think it's good.
In the FAQs on the website, we'll list all the states that will let you take it more than 5 times as a reference.
So theoretically then, you could go to that state and ask to take the board, is that correct?
That's correct. We can't control what other states do, and somebody could decide if, New Columbia allows you, hypothetical state allows you to take it.
Could they reciprocate back into North Carolina?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, I think we've talked about it enough. Do you need a motion on that, or?
I would, I'd
Andy,
like to get a motion.
I'm sorry I cut you off. I
No,
just
no,
wanna make sure
no,
we-
I should have waited for you to, Mr.
No,
President.
no.
But I will make that motion.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Second.
Second. Stan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, excuse me.
Stan has a standing second.
Motion
Yes.
passed, motion passed.
We'll get that edit done and get it out to you guys here.
I do appreciate the amount of work went into this. It didn't just happen all at one time. It's been a lot of
Well,
thought.
and thank you guys, because the hardest work on this has been done with you guys. And Gene, thank you for talking to Bob and to Carmen on
Well,
this.
I just didn't know about it. to tell you the
Well,
truth.
it's nice, the nice thing about what you've done is, it's nice to get that sort of input before you publish a rule for notice and comment. So there's not a
Better
landmine.
before then, you get all the ugly letters and stuff and that type of thing.
With that then, I will give an update on the rule makings in progress. As you know, we have 2 that are going on. One is the new rule to obtain e-profile numbers. It's been very recently published. There has not been any comment that has come in on that. I have been, I always get invited to do a lot of CEs toward the end of the year, or when people are desperate for any CE, which
And they'll listen.
explains why I get
They'll listen to
invited
anybody.
at that point. But I have been talking about what e-profile is, and the comments I'm getting, CEs, of course, pharmacists already have them anyway. So I don't expect there'll be a whole lot on that. Continuing education, we are starting to get some very thoughtful comments, not many yet, but some very thoughtful comments, and I am collecting those. And of course, we have our public hearing on that in January, and so I'll keep collecting those. But I'm very encouraged that folks are paying attention to the.
That hearing will be here.
Yes, it will be, and depending, sort of, and I'm glad you asked that question, because it sort of previews something else that we'll need to think about is, depending on what the comments are, we'll have to decide. We'll have that hearing on January 17th. We may need some time to digest those comments before we make, and that's fine, or we may not. But coming into that hearing, Stan, I will have collected all the comments and summarized those for all of you and given what those are and staff thoughts on those comments. And you'll have those in front of you as the public hearing comes. And I suspect some of the same people that provide written comments will come and provide verbal comments, and I hope that is the case. So we're moving along with it. But yeah, to me, that's encouraging. People are looking at this and are providing thoughtful and constructive thoughts on that. That's all you can ever ask. So
It certainly is nice to think that people have a way to get involved in the process of rulemaking on an individual basis. That's what it's all about.
I will tell you too, and going back to Andy's suggestion earlier, I think that what I should have done differently and maybe should still do, if y'all think it is, I probably ought to have done an intro paragraph to that as well, because there's a lot of moving pieces in the CE rule, and I think unless y'all have an objection, I would be perfectly happy to do like a 1-paragraph thing that says, as you're thinking about that, here's why the board's doing this. And you say, we didn't wake up and decide, let's empty the apple cart here and start over. But I'd be happy to do that, because one of the questions I did get at a CE I just did, and there were 90 pharmacists at that CE, somebody said, if this goes through, does it mean we don't have to input all of our CE anymore? And I said, exactly what it means. And in fact, primary driver on this, and all of a sudden, people who had some concern about the CE suddenly changed their mind about that whole thing, so.
I thought you were gonna say the question was, can I carry this over? Cause if not, I'm leaving.
Yeah, they do that anyway. They do that when they find out I'm a speaker, they turn around and walk right back out. But if it's okay with you guys, I might put something up that's just similar to what we're talking about. And I'm not gonna put up that whole memo that we did,
Right.
but I think I'll do that.
I think that's smart.
Recess.
Be good.
Could we indulge, us before we move on to the next topic, can we take like a 15-minute recess and come back at 10:15 and be okay?
Gee,
Yes, sir.
yes, in 3 hearings. We had two just as a matter of, would like to
Great. Bowman. And Brandon, he is our with First Citizens Bank. And as you all know, we have a very conservative finance policy or investment policy, which tracks statutes that govern the state treasurer on that. And Brandon came over to recommend some ways in which we could adjust our investment portfolio. We're not going to realize big gains, and nor is that really the purpose of those funds. But Brandon felt like that we could see something a little better than about the 0.9% return that we are getting on those. That portfolio essentially now is all in CDs, which of course have a low yield, and also because you get a little bit of a liquidity problem with that. And you'll see that Brandon suggested that our portfolio include Treasury and agency securities with a 3-year maturity limit. That gives us more liquidity than we have with the current CDs and may provide us with a bit more yield in our reserve fund. So the Finance Committee heard a presentation from Brandon. They asked a lot of good questions about that, and at the end of the day, the Finance Committee recommended that the board direct Mr. Whitley to make some changes in our portfolio to reflect that, and so this is before you guys to see if the full board would approve of that shift. So again, Carol, Andy, if I said anything wrong, I defer to you guys on that.
Did the Finance Committee actually move and support this officially?
Yes, they did. The Finance Committee took a vote at the end and unanimously agreed that Mr. Whitley's suggestion was a prudent one for the board's finances.
So we can take that motion, it doesn't need a second since it comes from committee, and we can just vote on
That's
it.
correct. You can.
If there's any further comment, we'll take that at this time.
Second.
All those in favor?
You started it.
All in favor of the new direction, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No, that passed. Thank you. Thank y'all for what you did. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, it was that was one of, I think, the better Finance Committee meetings we've ever had, folks being active on that. Crystal, come on up. Crystal and I want to talk to you, and Gene, this was probably discussed some while you were up there. NABP continues to move forward with its VPP program in a way that provides services for the state boards, and Crystal and Ellen are going to talk to you about where that VPP program is, what the outreach has been to the states, what kinds of commitments they are asking from the states in return, and the additional information that we need as staff to gather and present to you. So guys, take it away.
So one thing NABP has come up with is called a blueprint program. So it's kind of a good inspection information sharing for states, focusing on sterile compounding pharmacies that ship across state lines. So it's so other pharmacies in different states could gather inspections from our state or using the NABP universal form. So a couple of the commitments that they're looking for is either using their universal form that NABP has created for State Board of Pharmacies, or using your own inspection form that's been crosswalked with NABP's blueprint for inspections, focusing on 797 and 795. One of their kind of requirements that they're looking for is inspector training through Critical Point Boot Camp, which all of our inspectors are trained through Critical Point Boot Camp. And we also have 2 Critical Point certified inspectors now through Critical Point. And then also doing an inspection frequency of at least every 18 months. Any sterile compounding pharmacy that ships across state lines would be inspected by us every 18 months. And then sharing those inspection reports on the VPP terminal so other state boards of pharmacies can collect that information. So right now, we adhere to most of what the requirements that they're asking for, except right now we do not track pharmacies that ship across state lines. So we are working towards gathering that information and collecting that data so we can see what kind of scope we're looking at right now.
So pharmacies shipping sterile products across state lines?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right. So Gene, what this is you know, we license a lot of out-of-state pharmacies, and every state does that. And we're trying to work toward, in the post-NECC world, can there be a single repository where all of these inspections come in and every state can be comfortable going and saying, okay, I'm in North Carolina, the sterile compounding pharmacy in Kansas, we can go on to VPP, we will see that they have been inspected, and because the Kansas inspection form and training requirements have been crosswalked, that we can take comfort that that inspection has been done correctly, and we don't have a public health and safety concern in North Carolina. And for pharmacies in North Carolina who are providing similar services, that our pharmacies will be able to say to other state regulators, we have been inspected by the North Carolina Board of Pharmacy, the inspectors are trained in a quality way, they use a quality inspection form, and we don't have to, and Bill, you're familiar with some of this, it will reduce in-state pharmacies who suddenly find themselves needing an additional or a different inspection. It's a way of bringing not uniformity to the inspection of these, but sufficient similarity that there's one database we can all look to. And that's what we've been asked for these commitments, and for most of these, as Crystal said, we're doing, and we're not asking you to approve an agreement. We wanted to describe what's going on, and so the pieces of information we need to find out that we're working on is we've got to build out a better information on which of our pharmacies ship to other states. And then we're going to, as you all know, any pharmacy that does high-risk sterile compounding, as it stands, we inspect annually. For any pharmacy that does medium-risk sterile compounding, we inspect every 2 years. Low risk or non-sterile compounding, the baseline is every 4 years. What we will need to figure out for an internal well, not staffing, but it's a resource allocation issue, is how many medium or low risk sterile compounding pharmacies in North Carolina ship to other states that we would need to be able to commit to inspecting every 18 months. We don't think that that population is going to be a large one, but we don't know. And before we commit to NABP that we're going to do that, we got to figure that out. So we wanted to introduce what it is they're asking and what the point of this VPP program is, give you guys a chance to ask questions about it, and at some point down the road, probably January or February, once we've got, no, it'll be after renewal, so it'll probably be March or April, we would come back to you guys and say, okay, here's the data, here's what we know our additional resource allocation will need to be. Either we think we can do that now, or we think we need to add some commitment and get your feedback and approval to do that. Is that?
Yeah, we've identified there are 257 sterile compounding facilities permitted in North Carolina.
Which we knew that.
How many?
257.
That do any amount of sterile compounding.
Or any risk
Most
level.
of these aren't doing high-risk sterile compounding.
Right.
Most of them are doing low risk.
And so with that, we want to undertake a survey to contact them and find out, are you shipping across state lines these sterile products?
Most of those will be hospitals, probably.
Yeah, we haven't done a survey yet, so.
But yeah, we don't think it's going to be a huge population. But.
My comment, if you're ready for them, is not to try to draw a very broad or distinct line between low and medium, because
It's changing.
it's very easy to cross over from low to medium. I mean, that's a very, it's just too easy to go from low to medium. I would lump those two together, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And we're seeing that in our inspections. A lot of times when people are classified as medium, or as low risk, we go out there and they're really doing medium risk, and we bump them up to that medium standard when we go and inspect them.
And I think that's why NBP has passed the wide net of, like, anybody doing sterile compounding shipping across state lines must be inspected within an 18-month period.
So you said there's 257 permitted that reside in North Carolina?
Yep, that
Okay.
have identified that they are doing some form of sterile compounding.
One of the things you should all know too is that Crystal and Ellen have already been heavily involved with the development of the VPP inspection form, and so I feel very comfortable that our inspection form, frankly, in my opinion, is better than theirs, but it certainly meets all of is going to meet all the requirements.
I've gone through the NAB blueprint. They require that they go through it and make sure that it meets their criteria, but I've gone through the criteria and it meets most of what they're requiring in their criteria.
How do you handle, excuse me, Gene,
Go ahead. That's all right.
how do you handle the interstate variation? in requirement for 797?
When we're permitting within North Carolina,
Yeah.
an out-of-state pharmacy.
Well, for the
you're asking
VPP
about?
program.
For the so what are you saying? Does
Well,
VPP
California,
count?
Texas,
Right.
they've taken parts of 790 USP standards and rejected others.
Right, so.
Many states are rewriting it.
Right, well, currently within our permitting process, and everybody correct me if I misstate, we are evaluating their sterile inspection by their home board state, and if we don't find that it is sufficient or correlates with 797 compliance, we will request a VPP.
Okay, thanks.
And Bill, to your point about to the extent that individual states may have some variation, that's really what the driver is on the blueprint thing, is that the blueprint is to 797 and 795 requirements. And if a state produces a form or has a regulatory scheme in which they are not meeting those requirements, and the answer is that they're not going to be able to participate in this program, which could lead to some questions we may need. Again, as Ellen points out, our requirement is if you're getting a permit here, you got to produce an inspection that shows 795 and 797 compliance. And if we can't get that from the Home State Board of Pharmacy, we tell the pharmacy we'll be happy to take a VPP because we know it covers that. But once the sort of blueprint program takes off, then we're going to have a very, very clear indicator of which states are in on this and which states are not in on this, and that may lead to a second round of discussions that we need to have that may require some formal rulemaking or some other things, but we are sort of all trying to grasp toward a level of uniformity that's, while not perfect, because it never will be among the states, is at least substantially overlapping, and we're
Can I ask
getting
one
there.
more question?
I want to ask you a question. So did you allude to the fact that some states are rewriting USP standards to suit their own desires?
Yes, absolutely.
Which is interesting, since federal law says you gotta.
I'm sitting here,
all-
so that would be even more a reason to join such a nationwide network, is that right? What do we give up?
Nothing.
The only commitment would be to that 18-month inspection, to increase some of those that aren't being inspected annually, increase them up to an 18-month.
And we get assurances that pharmacies that are going through that process have similar,
Correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
we get assurance from if a state is participating in that blueprint
so
program.
they wouldn't be
inspection
rewriting
from that
USP
state.
standards, is that right?
That's correct.
Or if they were, they would not be a participant state.
It's interesting, it came up, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit on the meeting I just came back. I talked to one of the state board execs was talking to me. He was talking about distributing samples and that type of thing, and they had a program for that. I said, well, how do you meet the DQSA or the TraceLink standard? He said, well, we passed our own rules about that. I thought, well, that's a federal rule. You
We
can't.
call that whistling past the graveyard.
Okay,
The term
I didn't want to be stupid, so I didn't say much, and I tried to have the proper decorum, but I started thinking, you can't do that. And you can't rewrite USP, is that right?
That's, it does go on, but Gene, you're
Okay.
absolutely correct. that
Okay.
These are uniform standards that
Right,
apply
okay.
nationally.
Well, USP Chapter 797 is
Interpretation, I'm sure.
there's a lot of room for interpretation.
understand.
Plus, there is clearly room for, because those are minimum standards, there are allowances for other ways to comply with the standards besides what are, outlined as the gold standard, for lack of a better term.
Did you have another comment?
I did. My only other question was with the VPP program, what's built into that program that allows a pharmacist to contest or rebut a finding?
So within the VPP, their inspection form will be put on the portal at NAVP, and then all state boards can see it. But also, they have, I think, a month or 2 months to review their inspection form and propose a corrective action plan to correct that, and that will be included in the bundle on the NAVP portal. So the member board, state boards of pharmacy can look at the whole package, the inspection, the noted deficiencies, and the corrective action plan. And that's where the decisions get made. That's the information used.
And to your point, Bill, we have had a couple of instances in which we got a VPP inspection for an out-of-state applicant. So somebody's not previously permitted with us, and there were sometimes serious identified deficiencies, and we would say, well, look, we can't move forward on a staff level with this, you can go before the board. But there have been instances in which those pharmacies do go back to VPP and say, look, we disagree with the findings, and here's why. And we've seen cases in which the report was changed as a result of that. And then, of course, we've also seen ones where it's like, nice try, but you need to fix your problem. So there is always an opportunity in that program for somebody who's unhappy to say, well, I think you missed something, or this is in fact not an error. And we've seen that the VP program will respond to that. So I guess people's individual mileage will vary on that.
So you need affirmation from the board to continue this process, is that?
Well, yeah, we don't need a motion or anything. We wanted you guys to be aware of what we're doing so that we didn't walk in here in March or April and say, hey, we want to sign up to this compact to be a part. And you guys are like, what the heck are you talking about? And why are we doing it? But I think we've got it. I think it's a real public health and safety advantage. If we can meet the commitments that NABP is asking for, and in my opinion, these are not unreasonable requests for commitments. If we can get into this and hopefully get as many states as possible to be a part of that, I think this is a real potential public health and safety benefit.
Can I ask another question?
Certainly.
Are states like Virginia, Texas, California, are they buying in?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
The truth of the matter is, Bill, the states that have good and active boards want this to work, because none of us have got any abiding interest in trying to have our own separate additional inspections and the like. We would all like to have relatively uniform reports coming into a repository, and we can access those. And clearly that's in the interest of the pharmacies as well. To me, the challenge is going to be states that are under-resourced and have neither the training, and because they have neither the training nor the field staff to go out and commit to these types of inspections. But we're going to know that shortly, which of these states will be able to meet that or not. And for the states that, and if we find out, there are 20 states or whatever, I don't know what the number would be. If we find out there are whatever X number there are, those states that can't participate, then I think then we've got to come back together and say, okay, what do we need to do as a licensing board about that, about those other states? And that'll be a longer discussion we'll need to have. But
What is the critical mass for this to be successful for NABP? How many states do they have to get?
They have not that.
I mean, if you don't get many, it's not very valuable.
I think most of the costs are already sunk in, but you're right, as a practical matter, if you only get 5 or 6 states that commit to it, it's not gonna be much of a resource to the boards.
And they did say on the call that they would be offering like annual webinar training for sterile compounding, trying to entice people to participate. So for all the investigative inspector staff, they would be offering a free annual sterile compounding training.
And they'll be training staff of the boards of pharmacy and not pharmacies.
Correct.
Correct.
Now, who is they?
NABP.
Through Critical Point.
Through Critical Point.
It's not,
So-
NABP staff aren't doing the training.
Eric
They'll
was
contract
thinking-
with Critical
Yeah.
Point to do that.
Yeah.
When you said Critical Point Boot Camp, are you talking about the online program or actually attending,
No, it's
going to their
the
facility
live
in
program up
New Jersey?
Yep.
And NABP's expended a ton of money already getting folks to go up there, but that's gonna be for under-resourced states, I think NABP will be able to provide the training opportunity. The question will be, do those states have the resources to take advantage of that training, put their people out in the field and do the inspections? We will see.
Thanks for the update.
Yeah, man, it's a good program. And listen, really credit to Kristen and Helen, who are as involved and probably more involved than just about any other board staff in the country on helping with this process. Financial report, come on up, Gail. And before Gail gives the report, I got a letter from Gail this week, which I hope I would never, ever get, but we all knew was going to come, and that is that Gail is, after 40 years, retiring from the board. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to get you upset before you report.
You're not going to Oklahoma, are you?
No, thank God.
No
Well, make
worries
sure.
there.
But Gail's last day with us will be January 31st. Just trying to remember how many days were in January. January 31st, 2017. You will be getting more information about the celebration of all the wonderfulness that is Gail next month. But so the January meeting will be the last one that Gail gives the whole report. And of course, you've met Crystal and know that Crystal and Rhonda are ramping up, and we're, you know, we will be as prepared as we're capable of being prepared for the transition. But thank goodness Gail is not moving to Oklahoma, so come March, when we panic about something, Gail will be close by, and we'll pay her some per diem to come in and bail us out when the time comes. But much more celebration to occur, but we do have an official date on this, and quite the transition. Gail, I've said it before, Gail in tenure is number 2 behind Hancock for the longest tenure at the Board of Pharmacy. If she'd just stay another 12 and a half years, she could set the all-time record. But despite my request that she do so, she politely told me to go to hell, that was not going to happen.
So you
We
don't
could
want,
rewrite the history of it and just kind of write him out, and then you'd be number 1.
can we make a motion that Gail stay?
Yes, you
And vote
certainly
on it.
can. I don't know how we'll be able to enforce it, but we could certainly do that. So,
Thank you. And,
All right. Well,
we don't
thank
look-
y'all.
We don't look forward to the celebration, but carry
yeah,
on.
it's gonna be a big time
All right.
next month. Family Clint celebrating.
Yeah,
Mr. Pinion?
yes.
Sergeant at Arms.
Guess we'd be-
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Okay, well, under your financial tab, the first report is the monthly financial report to Mr. Campbell with a short summary of our October activity. So October is the first, month in our fiscal year, so we still, general ledger has not been closed for the prior fiscal year. So some of the figures on the balance sheet will change with the closing of the general ledger and then the addition of some of our auditors' journal entries. The next report is our balance sheet, and if you'll look at line 5 and 14, our total cash and receivables is $2,240,000, and that number is correct. And then our total assets is $9,052,000, and total liabilities and fund balance is $9,052,000. The next report is our profit and loss statement for October, and this includes just October of 2016 activity only. So our revenues, which this is, the month, the first month, as I stated, in our fiscal year and before our renewal revenue has started coming in. But anyway, total revenues was $35,461, and total expenditures was $348,000. And that number is high for a monthly total because we did have the line 44, the North Carolina PHP payment, which we pay them quarterly, and that was $62,500. And then because of our salary increases and with merit increases, that salary figure is a little higher this month. Does anyone have any questions?
Nobody has the nerve.
All right. So do you have anything?
A couple of other things to talk about. One is I think you mentioned we are undergoing our audit. That's the field work is complete. Gene, you may be contacted by the auditors for a management follow-up on that, but it went very smoothly from my standpoint, and certainly the on-site auditors indicated that was, and it always has been, everything was available to them. So we will be looking, of course, at the January meeting to present the final financial audit for your review and approval, and then we will submit that to the various state agencies who insist on receiving it, and we'll be able to say we did that. And then, Gil, do you want me to talk about
The restricted.
the restricted designations? So related to that, if you guys will look, you have under a sub-tab here, you all know we have different restricted funds, and we did get specifically in the October meetings that the litigation balance was increased going into this fiscal year from $200,000 to $500,000. But our other restricted funds, the database upgrade had $180,000 in there. That was the end of the contract with Vincent to do that first overhaul of the database. Our financial position needs to indicate that contract has been completed and all that money has been used to complete that. And also note that for the IT infrastructure, the $1 million reserve fund for that, that is of course the money that has been reserved for a complete database upgrade, and we're working with ThoughtSpan on that, and we have spent $220,000 on that to this point. So that restricted balance needs to reflect a $780,000 balance, and then of course the insurance deductibles, fortunately we've not had to use any of those. So we would ask if you would specifically approve today, and certainly subject to any questions you may have, those balances as of 9/30/2016, so they can be reflected in the financial audit. So
Motion to approve.
Second.
Have a duly made motion, second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous, it's approved. Thank you.
All right,
thank you
thank
very
you.
much. Josh, investigations and inspections. Getting fancy tonight.
High tech.
Does not have anything to do with this. All right, thanks. So if you look behind the tab for the investigations so far this year, we're sitting nice at 221. Procedural legal is in the front with 97, and errors and then diversions tie for second with 44 each, which is still a little disconcerting. Inspection follow-ups, and then substance abuse and incident reports, and then just other. So things are moving along quite well with the cases. As you met earlier, Ms. Sims, she's certainly getting up to speed with working cases and doing inspections. So we heard nothing but good things about her from her field training, so that was good. Second page for the surrenders. We've had a couple since the last meeting. Technicians are up at 18, and pharmacists are held at 8, and then DMEs and pharmacies haven't changed with 1 each. So otherwise, like I said, things are moving along very well within the department. Pre-hearing went well yesterday with Ken Wilkins and Lisa Mendez providing testimony. They did a really good job doing that, and so Stan was the hearing officer, so it went very well.
Questions for Josh on that? And also Josh is going to talk about the hurricane response
Right,
here.
so after the hurricane,
report,
after the hurricane came through, myself, Investigator Fabiano, Investigator Mendez, and Sims, and Canoy, we went out into the field to go over, or to stop by the pharmacies where we felt that the most damage occurred in the state. I went down to the medicine shop, as you see here right at the beginning, down in Fayetteville. The store is owned and run by Miss Christina Washington. surprisingly, this was the only pharmacy that sustained any damage in Fayetteville. She's at the bottom end of Murkison Road, if any of you all know where that is, if you're familiar with Fayetteville. She's just down the road from Fayetteville State University, and it just seems to be at where she's at, it's a very, very low, low-lying land. Plus, it doesn't help that she's got a very large creek in the back. So these were the counties that we felt were affected. So it was Bertie, Bladen, Columbus, Craven, Cumberland, Edgecombe, Hertford, Hoke, and then Johnston, Jones, Lenore, Martin, Nash, New Hanover, Robeson, and Wayne. Overall, though, we found only really 3 pharmacies that had any damage. It was quite surprising. I mean, even in the city of Lumberton that was hit so badly with it, it just seemed like that the part or the large section of Lumberton that was mostly affected really didn't hit really any pharmacies. So this was the day that I showed up to Medical Arts Pharmacy there in Fayetteville. Miss Washington's husband had, put up the board, this plywood right here, and, wrote on there contaminated drugs, so as to hopefully avoid anybody else breaking into her store. This is part of the creek that's directly behind the pharmacy, and that's just a lot of the debris that was still remaining there. A lot of those are empty prescription bags. As you'll see later in some slides here, she had a tremendous amount of water in her pharmacy, and things just it blew out the glass windows, and things just went floating away. It pulled the concrete apart there at the back. That's only about maybe 15 feet from the back of her store, and then once you step on that concrete, it's just a straight shot down into the creek. It's about a 10-foot drop, which gives you an idea of how much water was down in that way. There's a long shot of the creek that's behind her store. Miss Washington had told me, that it certainly didn't help that, the week before Fayetteville had gotten so much of that rain, and she was already flooded. And then the hurricane came, and then the Corps of Engineers released the dams that were, she said, above Spring Lake and Fort Bragg, and the water really had nowhere else to go. And this was the lowest point, I guess, in Fayetteville in that line of when the water came down. That's part of the glass that blew out. That's the front of her store. This is the inside of the store. This is what was left. I mean, this was, I believe I was there on October 20th, so this was still probably at least 10 days after the hurricane had come through. She still had some standing water. And I mean, everything in the store was destroyed. Those are bins of medications that she had somewhat gotten together afterwards, and there wasn't one single thing in her store that was salvageable. Not one bottle of medicine, not one DME piece of equipment, nothing. That's to give you an idea of the mold that was already starting to get in there. I didn't want to stay in there too long with Miss Washington because, I mean, the smell was bad, and I certainly didn't want to start breathing in a bunch of mold. I certainly didn't have my hazmat suit on. That's another shot of kind of the main area there in the back of the pharmacy. That kind of shows you where the water line is. If you look at the clock and then look straight up, you'll see that dark line that runs across there. That was the water level in her pharmacy. That's a lot higher than what it appears here. The water level was about 14 feet in there. It was really quite something to see. That's a room in there. I couldn't get in there. That she had a lot of her DME supplies in there. These are boxes, and there were dozens of boxes of the adult diapers And so, you know, they looked like big white footballs by then, so a couple of steps in there was pretty squishy, so I didn't decide to go any further. Another section of her pharmacy where things were just, you know, strewn all about from the water. There's a really good shot of the water line that was in her pharmacy. Again, you know, you got your standard, I guess, what, about a 7-foot doorway. And then that's, I know the picture doesn't do it justice, but that's probably at least another 4 to 5 feet up where the water was. The water line again, to add insult to injury, the wires you see hanging down there in that dark spot there, the only thing that would have been salvageable was a flat screen TV that she had up there that played like various commercials and stuff about medications and whatnot. The day after the hurricane and the water went out of the building, some people broke in and stole the TV. So the only salvageable thing, yeah. So, but again, another good shot of where the water line was. That stuff, I mean, nobody had moved any of this stuff, you know, neither her nor her husband. The refrigerator you see there, she told me was in the back of the pharmacy where we first saw the clock and the permits and stuff. And that's a pretty heavy refrigerator, and that was all the way towards the front of the pharmacy. Just another shot of some of the mold and the water line. And that was her main DME room. Miss Washington had a pretty good DME business going on, and again, nothing was salvageable in there. You know, back there she had, as you see, walkers. She had a couple of hospital beds back there that you really can't see. You know, canes, crutches. You know, she, and the bad thing was is that she didn't have flood insurance. She couldn't afford flood insurance. She said it was about $13,000 a year, and she said she just couldn't afford that. And so she said that the insurance was maybe going to cover her computers and a couple other things, but I mean, you know, it's a total, I mean, I kind of felt that she probably had about a $1 million loss, but, you know, between the building, the medications, and the DME products. Lisa Mendez and Kim Sims, they went to Carly C's in Benson. This one isn't that bad. I mean, the water level in there was maybe about a foot high. If you can see down there towards where the last hinge is on the door, there's a water line right there. And then that's just a shot of the pharmacy in there. Nearly everything was salvageable in there. That's another somewhat better shot of the water line. The darkened area on that counter right there is where the actual water was. So I guess it was about 2 feet. Elvington Drug, Maria Fabiano took care of the area down in the southeastern part of North Carolina, Columbus County, Robeson County, Bladen County. So Elvington Drug was first here there in Fairbluff. That's a shot, I think, of one of the side of the pharmacy where the water had come up and taken away the end part of that pavement right there. This is I guess the front door of the pharmacy. That was the glass, I believe, had been blown out. They had a pretty good deal of water in there as well. I think their water level was probably about 3 to 4 feet in there. Again, these are just shots of the pharmacy. It didn't look like there were many things that were salvageable in there. There's a longer shot of the pharmacy in there. You know, stuff was just, you know, strewn all about. And I guess there's a good shot there, kind of on that wall to the left there. You can see the water line there. And There's another shot of the water line. And, you know, the prescriptions are, you know, were just drenched, soaked, you know, that were laying on the floor along with other items. That's the outside of the pharmacy. In the back of the pharmacy, and you can see the water line there in the back of the pharmacy. This is behind the pharmacy, Maria was telling me. And again, this was 10 days after the hurricane, and there was still this much water. Maria said that this was, well, there was like a one-way driveway that kind of went around Elvington Drug. But then there in the back, this is just kind of open space. You see way in the back there, there's like a boardwalk or a bridge that people can walk over to the river that was behind there as well. I believe that would have been the Lumber River as well. Another shot there in the back, and of the water line on the pharmacy. And there's another pretty good shot of still how much water was left, was still there. And another good shot of the water there in the back. Not quite sure if Maria got that shot. It was almost like she was in the water. So, just a couple more shots of inside Elvington. And I guess, you know, this is what, you know, prescriptions, what will happen to them when they're underwater for a couple of days. And that was a clinic next to it, and the water, I don't believe that the door was taken off by, you know, the workers there. I believe it was blown off by the pressure of the water. And then she went over to Kuntz Drug there in Chadbourne. And this one wasn't really that bad. For whatever reason, she couldn't get inside. There aren't any inside shots, but they certainly had to, you know, board up any number of places, I believe, where all the windows were of the pharmacy. And then the last one. Now, this is a shot. Maria was trying to get to Bladenboro. She said this was Highway 701 that goes into Bladenboro, and obviously, you know, you can't get by. You know, so, and there's another good shot of it right there. You know, the water really did a number on the road. Again, this is inside of the pharmacy. They had a, you know, pretty good water level there as well. There were some things that were salvageable. I believe this was the one pharmacy out of all of these that looked like it was still remained open afterwards. They probably had about a 2 to 2.5 foot water line in there. Yeah, they had draped off areas where I believe you were safe to go in. And you know, so of course they show that they are open there. And those are just the last couple of shots there. So, and that was it. But you know, like I said, overall, from the amount of rain and flooding and wind, you know, that we did get from Hurricane Matthew, I think all in all, you know, the eastern part, northeastern part, and southeastern part fared extremely well. Of course, Miss Washington would probably beg to differ. You know, that was really something to see down there. You know, it's the pictures kind of really don't do it justice. But you know, of all the pharmacies that all of us visited, the investigators reported back to me, you know, that they got a lot of positive feedback. The pharmacists, you know, were very pleased and thankful that we were coming by, checking on them, making sure everything was fine, that their building was fine. We were giving out, you know, sheets of information with various websites and phone numbers for them to call if they had any questions, like to the FDA for their OTC products. They had a link to the DEA and a phone number, and of course they had our information as well. But again, you know, I received the same, you know, kind of thankfulness, from the pharmacies that I visited there in just, Hoke and Cumberland counties. So, again, it was, all in all, a very good deal that we had there.
Thanks for that great effort. I'm sure the board would commend you for that, too. No doubt.
Absolutely.
Any pharmacies closed that didn't reopen?
That didn't reopen?
Yeah.
Other than just Miss Washington's, no. But she already has found a temporary location that may become permanent. She's now in a strip mall that's directly across from Fayetteville State University, still on Murchison Drive or Avenue.
Medicine shop in Bladenboro, Rebecca Smith, who's actually, she's Rebecca, she's a pharmacy classmate of mine. They've had to move to a temporary location because I think the flooding also, as they started tearing out the flooding damage, they found asbestos, so she's had to move out to a temporary spot. But we are, obviously, staff, we're working with those folks to minimize any headache they have in terms of continuous operation and the like.
Yeah.
So,
And the one thing that kind of surprised me was that how many pharmacists, thanked us for putting all that information up on the website. You don't really think that pharmacists out there really read the website, and see what's on there. But it was very surprising to me, but, in a very good way. And they were very appreciative of all the information that we put up there. So,
I've heard a lot of positive feedback along those lines too.
yep.
Thank you, Josh.
All righty, absolutely.
Y'all, real quick, just a reminder thing. You all saw a copy of the annual report. Just as a reminder, Keith, so you know about this every year, about all occupational licensing boards have to file a Chapter 93B annual report, and I very much appreciate the help of all the staff. There's a lot of data that has to be gathered and crunched, and the staff did their usual bang-up job on that. I appreciate you guys taking time to review that ahead of time and provide some comments. You have another copy there. It has been filed, and it has been posted on our website. So the only addition to that is, because our fiscal year runs differently, as you noted in the annual report, we will supplement this by filing our audited annual report after the January board meeting and have that done. As long as we're talking about reports and the like, just an update. As you all know, the Office of the State Auditor began a visit with us in January of this year to follow up on the 2013 audit, to look at the inspections program that we implemented as a result of that 2013 audit. And we received a draft audit report from them last month, about the middle of last month. As you know, we've engaged in some discussions with the State Auditor's Office about that. By and large, the news is quite good from that audit. They believe we probably need to sharpen our pencil a little bit more on our checking of data as it goes into the database, and we've been talking with them about that. Mercifully, the audit staff agreed to give us until November 30th to provide a response to that, which gives us plenty of time. Where we sit now is after staff-to-staff meetings. We believe that their draft audit now is pretty much what their final one is going to be. I do believe there's a short, and I do emphasize short, response that we will want to submit to that. Clint and I are going to work on that, and Gene, my suggestion would be that if it's acceptable with you, certainly as the president, that the board, that you be authorized to act as the sounding board for that very short response and to review and act on the board's behalf to approve a response to that, and we'll get it done by November 30th.
Do we need to take official action on that, or
I think so.
can I
As long
appoint
as that's
myself?
That's the consent, that's the will of the board on that. But
Okay.
when I do say short, I'm anticipating like a two-page at most kind of thing. We do appreciate the willingness of the Office of the State Auditor staff to come here and meet with us at length and talk through what they've done. And again, lots and lots of good news on there. And frankly, to the extent they have suggestions about improving the data in our database, virtually each and every one of those suggestions are already things that we have done throughout the, just because I got to say it, you all remember what a massive task that was. And in the first year after setting up that program, over a 5-month period, field staff did over 1,500 inspections, and we had to gather whole new data sets on each and every pharmacy in the state. And the level and quality of work they did was enormous. To the extent there's some data issues, we believe that the vast majority of those are a product of launching a gigantic effort of that sort over about a 6-month period. And in fact, we believe that our systems now for back-checking data address each and every one of the concerns that the state auditor may have. But we'll certainly hope that's the case, and we'll be filing a response. But thank you all for being patient with my updates on this. It's 10 months on this is a lot longer than we thought it was going to be, but at some point I need to send Cindy and Crystal particularly to some place that has sand and palm trees as a thank you for all the hours they've spent dealing with the audit. So we'll be wrapping that up, and certainly report at the January meeting, and by email we'll let you know and give you a copy of all that. Questions from anybody? All righty, well, we may have a reminder, of course, let me suggest, actually, could we go ahead and do the consent agenda, Gene? Would that be okay?
Let's, I know we have Linda here with NCAP to speak.
Yep.
Let's do those next. if
Yep,
you don't mind.
sounds good. Linda, you gonna address the board for anything from NCAP, or are you just here in an observational capacity?
Well, I'm just here for Penny, our director. We have a new director, Dr. Penny Shelton, who is a Campbell graduate. She's a long-term care consultant pharmacist, and she had a conflict today, but I didn't know I was gonna say anything.
You don't have to, Linda,
But I
just
will
an
say
opportunity.
that, I think that she's really moving the association forward, and if you're not a member, I hope you will be, because we're real happy with her.
I would echo both of those things. Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. I think, is Joe Jordan, has anybody seen Joe or anybody from NCPHP? Okay, I think we're, a reminder, the telepharmacy committee, so that's Carol, Bill, and Stan, we'll meet. Michael Monet has come down, he's gonna talk to you, and Joey's gonna talk to you as well. So what I figure, as soon as we adjourn from here, everybody has a chance to get a plate of food, maybe we could convene in the big conference room and hear from Michael and from Joey, so we'll do that afterward. We do have consent agenda, and we do need a brief closed session.
Okay, your consent agenda has been presented to you on your board information. Call for a motion to approve or not to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Which one?
To confirm.
Have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, that's passed. The consent agenda is passed.
And we would ask for a closed session to discuss a personnel matter, a litigation matter, and a potential summary suspension matter.
Two litigation matters.
Two litigation matters.
A motion to that extent.
Motion for closed session, sir.
For those reasons you
For those
stated.
reasons, yes.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 So we'll move into closed session. We'll join you guys for lunch shortly, hopefully. Thank you for your attendance today.
Okay, so I got one for you.
Do it.
I got a question.
Uh-oh.
Have we approved our consent?
So,
Well, there is one. Pharmacist, technician, CPP.
Yeah.
it's a very
Well, that is the consent agenda.